G'day Internet, Max Wright here, and I'm super excited today. It's the first time I've had this guest on the show. Jeff Booth, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Max.
Okay, now Jeff, I mean, you're well known as, a macro guy, economics guy, tech guy, all of these things, and there's so many things I want to talk to you about. I want to jump in. You wrote a tweet yesterday, which I thought was really cool. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into it. It said, neutral reserve currency is required, not for for the US and the world. Now that's an interesting one because a lot of people see as having reserve currency status as being a huge advantage to America, but you're obviously seeing a downside there. And I'm just going to guess that there's the timing of that is going to be the significant component there. But why don't you elaborate on why the US needs a neutral reserve currency just as well as everybody else?
Yeah, so I wrote a little bit about this book in my book, but all over the world, the trade balance has to equal zero. It's a zero-sum game. So in that, what that means is some people have to buy, some people have to sell. And if you have a neutral reserve, or so if you have a reserve currency of the world, what that means is you have to have effectively a high purchasing rate as and you have to be the purchaser from other countries, and other countries become the exporter to you. So buyers and sellers, and it's just a function of the way that the currency is designed. So what that would mean is you would have to incentivize debt creation. You'd have to incentivize low interest rates, high labor rate, and on the other side of the world, they would have to incentivize low labor rate and exporting. That sets up a conflict that essentially in the U.S. has hollowed out the manufacturing sector and moved it all to China. And that manufacturing sector is in a lot of cases now it hollows out the military industrial complex too. A lot of the supply chains tied into the entire security engine of the U.S. move into China just for economic reasons, because it can be produced cheaper there. And there's no way to onshore that in a way that, because the economic value is cheaper produced somewhere else, businesses will go there. And China and the government of China is trying to make that happen as well. So it's all created by a trade imbalance. So what people believe gave them an advantage for a long time, right? And it did. It gave the financial sector in the U.S. an advantage in a long time. It gave, but it came at the expense of hollowing out the manufacturing sector. Now, how do you change that? Right. So one of two things would have to happen. The U.S. would have to make their labor rate a lot cheaper, right, by destroying the value of the dollar, and so they make their real labor rate cheaper. And at the same time, what would have to happen is other nations would have to make their labor rate more expensive. Right. So you even out those trade flows, and you can imagine what's happening with every time the U.S. does this, other countries just peg to the U.S. and make sure their labor rate stays in lockstep. So you're pegging to an international reserve currency that's being manipulated, but it's kind of just keeps the game going all over the world. A neutral reserve currency would have labor adjust in real time. So as countries expanded in a certain market, their labor would move up in real time to capture that, and that would solve these trade flows.
Gotcha. How do you so you kind of touched on like a geopolitical consequence there to this policy of the last several decades, and the hollowing out of America, the exportation of all the jobs, the lack of the skills and the things that we miss, and we just become so much more dependent on each other. That sets us up to be significantly weaker than we once upon a time were, when we were able to produce our own necessities. When that time has gone, do you think there's an appetite now, both in the voting public and in the echelons of Congress or wherever the powers that be, do they care about that now? Has the Ukraine crisis played into that significantly? Is this something that they care about, or they still don't care about? Or do you go full conspiratorial and say they plan this and want this?
No, this isn't. I don't go conspiratorial at all. In fact, this is just a system reinforcing a system, and because people have an incongruence in their own thinking, they think and it comes from, just if I asked you, um, you could nod your head and say technology is deflationary and should create everything in my life getting cheaper, and you could try to purchase and use everything like in your life getting cheaper, like this Zoom call, like Google, and everything you do is actually gaining more value. But concurrently, you think your house should go up forever. And we fail to see that we are the same. Every single job we have is the same thing that's bought on the other side. We think they're two independent processes, and they're one and the same. We're all sellers and we're all buyers. And so if you have a system that exploits that through inflation, then effectively one class of people get really rich at the expense of another class of people. And that happens all over the world. So that's just a structural problem, because we've never had a currency that it's allowed for kind of deflation. We created hard currencies, and then we created credit on top of hard currencies, and that credit needed to grow, and that credit growing, nobody wanted to vote for a depression. No one wanted to vote for a recession. So you would always vote for somebody who effectively lied to you by hiding inflation in money and saying we can grow forever. So if you asked the average person on the street in the US and said, hey, listen, I know how to fix this. Your labor rate has to be what the labor rate is in China, and then all the jobs will move back. Would anybody take that? Right? And the answer is no. So they want both. They want the high labor rate and all of the purchasing that happens without the price increases that would come from that. And it's that incongruence in us generally, broadly, that people can't see. And so we live in a system that exploits that globally.
Right. And so something like a Bitcoin, it basically forces that integrity into the system if it's adopted widespread.
Yeah, so we would never, and so one of the critical things with Bitcoin that people, I think too few people understand right now, is you gain velocity in money through technology rather than velocity in money through debt. And that is a substantial change. So in other words, you can have unlimited velocity in money, and you could have any rate that the economy could grow. I could beam my Bitcoin across the world, and it could come back. You could do 40 hops to different people and come back to me in 10 minutes, all outside of the existing banking system with no nominal cost to do that. So you have unlimited velocity in money through, and when I say not Bitcoin, I'm talking layer 2 now on Bitcoin, Lightning Network on top of Bitcoin, but on a open decentralized protocol with a 21 million cap that changes the rules of literally everything else, because we've never seen a money like this. We've never seen a money that actually could have velocity in the money itself. We've seen gold, but gold, because it has to be centralized, allows you to build these credit markets on top. And then as soon as you build the credit market on top, there's more money to be made from the banking system to make the gold a smaller portion of the reserves. Mm-hmm. And so it sets up an incentive structure that the credit has to grow forever. And Bitcoin is a very different incentive structure. And so and it's so early, and most people are failing to see it because they're measuring the new system without counterparty risk, with network effects from the existing system. So they're pricing that new system in US dollars or Turkish lira or whatever. So they're not They're not seeing what's actually happening, but that new system is actually going to price everything else.
Yeah. Can you perhaps talk a little bit, if I'm assuming you've done this exercise, we've had gold-backed currencies before, but the rate of inflation of the gold supply kind of increases generally with demand. We've never had a system. We've obviously got the current fiat system, which is just the currency supply can expand with ad infinitum. What about this concept of a Bitcoin hard cap? It cannot go up. Have you thought through the consequences of that? And can you kind of, let's start talking about those, like what we've got to use our mind's eye to think forward this, like what are the consequences of that, good and bad?
There's it's such a 180-degree shift from the world we're in today, that it's really hard to wrap your head around. And for most people here, if they heard this the first time, Max, they're going to push back on what I'm going to say. It's going to, because it almost takes rewiring your brain into a new model to be able to see what the consequences are, good and bad, mostly good, but realizing we have to transition from a system we're in to a new system, and that's going to be chaotic and messy along the way. But let's just first principle level set. Technology is deflationary, and that means globally, the more technology moves, which is just our ideas moving into things that we either use or don't use, and if we use them, they give us more value, right? And that productivity gain is deflationary. And so that means any inflation rate, it's not Bitcoin isn't a deflationary currency, it's a neutral currency. But any inflation rate is only created because of manipulation of money. Is that fair?
Yep, I agree.
And it's unnatural. So what you have to say is any inflation rate that you grant somebody an authority to create inflation against that deflationary force, which is supposed to transfer the broad-based abundance from the technology we use to society, must, as a consequence, drive centralization, coercion, corruption into a system over time. It must. So we think, and so there is no other, just from a first principle standpoint, one's the free market, one's the manipulation of the free market, and it must. Winners and losers on both cases, but from a principle standpoint, any inflation rate against naturally occurring technology deflation must concentrate power and wealth in few hands, and then along that axis, destroy democracies as a result. So if you now agree with that statement, you can push back, but I don't see any, nobody's pushed back with a plausible argument to that. But if somebody wants to on your show, you reach out to me. Mm-hmm. Now, what does that mean? What it means is we would never vote for a system like Bitcoin if somebody, a politician, said, I'm going to take our economy globally and collapse it, and every bank is going to fail, and we're going to live in this new world that's fair, based on hope, based on abundance for most people. You'd never vote for that because we're used to our wages going up, our house prices going up, and we're used to that system. So it's so hard to see the new system. And that's actually why Bitcoin, outside of any rulers, anybody who can change the protocol, is a forcing function to something we would never vote for. And what it means is prices against Bitcoin will come down forever. But the mass majority of people won't notice that because they're going to be measuring in their local currencies, and they're going to be thinking Bitcoin is going up forever against but what's really happening is it's showing you, the free market, that prices are coming down against Bitcoin forever. Mm-hmm. And so that transition step, and what that means is early people on Bitcoin are going to take more of the wealth, right? But they don't control the protocol. They don't control any more any more value by having more wealth in the system. And what that means over time is, unless they're producing value for other people measured in other people's terms, then they're distributing their bitcoins by essentially rent seeking on top of that. Make sense?
Does.
So so unless you're creating value in a longer term basis, unless you're creating value for somebody, you're distributing your Bitcoin.
Is it not reasonable to say that you have already created so much value in the early vision? You adopted Bitcoin early. You created a lot of value in seeing that and being a first mover and taking on all that risk, that just through leasing out your Bitcoin, your wealth will continue to grow.
So I love that you said that. It's a total misconception, but it's not a misconception if you're looking back at history and you said we're going to peg fiat systems to Bitcoin and create a leverage-based system on Bitcoin. Then what you just said would happen. But I don't think that will happen. In fact, what you just saw is the unwind in Celsius and everything else. There's a whole bunch of people doing that. Bitcoin has zero counterparty risk. It just keeps on going. So all of the people that leveraged, rented out their Bitcoin for return, Bitcoin has no return on it. Everybody who did that just got wiped out to zero.
And you think that will be the way it will be for
It'll
forever?
keep happening. It'll keep happening. Bitcoin is going to turn into a currency. It's going to turn into a peer-to-peer network currency. And the amount of debt, why it's so hard to see that is we've lived with that amount of debt. And we think the debt is a requirement of the system because it always has been a requirement of the system. The velocity of money on Bitcoin means it's a much smaller portion. And what that means is people will still get greedy, and they'll think that isn't true, and they're going to take too much risk on the way through, and they're going to distribute their Bitcoin by doing so. It's a 180-degree change in there's never been a currency like this that is able to be gained velocity. So we're used to thinking in debt. We're used to thinking of house prices go up forever. House prices only go up forever because we manipulate money to make them so, to make the debt that governments have lower in price. That's the only reason. House prices against Bitcoin will fall to their utility value. They'll look like they're going up against current existing currencies, but what they're really doing is falling to the utility value in Bitcoin.
I really like the 180-degree view aspect. When I first ran this thought experiment with myself, I was like, okay, I've got this totally different kind of money that does the exact opposite. In trying to guess what will happen, a pretty good starting point would be the exact opposite would happen with this. We see the hollowing out of the middle class, the wealth divide growing, the income divide growing, and perhaps we should expect, I think it's a good starting point anyway, to start. It's like, okay, we should expect the exact opposite of all of those things. And then trying to come up with a logical understanding and the justification and the theory to get to that is what's, I think, very interesting.
So let's carry what you just said forward. Why is that the exact opposite? Inflation wouldn't work in the existing system unless it also equaled wage deflation, right? So inflation is wage deflation and savings loss, right? So what that means is there's people on the top with more assets are their houses are going up, and if you're renting, your rents are going up, and your wages aren't going up as fast. Is that fair? Yes. So it's wage deflation. And why is that? It's because wages are sticky. People think they got a 5% raise, and they think they're doing okay. They think, and inflation rate was 15%. So they lose, and they can't calculate all of these because it's being manipulated at such a rate. And remember when all of the printing went on and all the central banks said, don't worry, there's going to be no inflation. And then it's 12, 15 months later and you see huge inflation rates. It's because it takes a while to build through the system. And the people at the bottom of the level get killed there because they're last to see it. Same thing happens in reverse. If wages are going down each year, they're sticky going down too. So what ends up happening is people's purchasing power is increasing forever, and on the Bitcoin system. Even more so, what what ends up happening in these are the things that truly break your brain, because they're so hard to see because we've never lived in that system before. You have to pull out different analogs and different use cases so people can break out of this system that they're in. But what happens with anything that becomes abundant is there's no economy to be able to be built there, right? There's no entrepreneurs, there's no money to be made on something abundant. So take oxygen you're breathing right now, the most valuable thing in your life. Why is it free? And why aren't there entrepreneurs running around selling you a face mask to oxygen? You wouldn't pay for it because it's free. You might in space, you might underwater where it's not abundant, but you wouldn't sitting in your office. And then carry that on. Why do you think your calculator app on your phone is free? It's not because of advertising. It's because it's a line of code, and if you look at 100 apps on the app store trying to sell you a calculator app, a line of code, a penny, right? And if you can make there's no other entrepreneurs that are thinking about creating a calculator app. Right? And so they become free. Same thing with your photos today. How many photos you take compared to how many photos you took 20 years ago. All of these industries. So what ends up happening is, as prices fall, what we think we need to live with falls like crazy, and we get more and more purchasing power. So much purchasing power we actually can't even fathom it, because we free our time. But we live in exactly the opposite system today. And what people are scared of is they're scared of falling off a hamster wheel that's moving higher and higher in prices, and the food prices are getting higher, and their energy prices are getting higher, and everything else. And all of those prices getting higher is only because of manipulation. And you need more manipulation so you can create more jobs. And people are standing up, I need a job. I need a higher paying job. Every politician is saying, I'm going to create more jobs by creating more manipulation to keep prices going up forever. It's exactly the opposite system that we live in today, versus what happens on Bitcoin.
Yeah, the degree. I spent an enormous amount of time thinking about this stuff, and you're right. It's so hard to shift the paradigm, but every now and again, like an analogy or something, just a penny drops for you when you just think of the amount of wealth that has been taken away from people's lives day to day through the mechanism of inflation. That it is just incredible. I think of my grandmother or your grandmother paying like 5 cents for a gallon of milk at a time when there was probably someone sitting on a stool doing these ones. And now the labor costs are almost zero. 1,000 cows are being milked by one person and some robotics. It should be a slither of a fraction of a penny for that milk now, but it's not. It's $5 a gallon. It went up 100x instead of going down 100x. And when you see that,
it's such it's and we're in a phase transition in society where the inventions that we've created and the technology that we've created, and where you tie in artificial intelligence and robotics and some of these things that are moving at a crazy rate, an exponential rate, we're at a phase change that unless we move to a system that allows that abundance to be able to be driven to society, we're gonna destroy our world. That's what's going to, unfortunately. And if I think about it in probabilities all the time. I think there's a higher rate of probability that we end life on this planet. I wish I didn't have to say that. Then Bitcoin succeeds. And the reason I'm so become advocating for Bitcoin and thinking this through and actually investing in this ecosystem right now is so people are aware of what they're actually doing while they're standing up. If trying to change a face on this existing system doesn't change the system at all, and there's no way to solve it, because you've probably heard me say this on podcasts before, but at debt that the world has today and how fast that's moving, the debt rate is increasing. There's just simply no way out of it. So door one, if you allow that to collapse, everything collapses all over the world. So no governments are going to choose that. So they're going to choose door two, destroy their currencies through inflation and hyperinflation. And as they do that, they're going to send the people all over the world hating each other, thinking it's a people problem when it's a system problem. And so that typically is rife for what currencies reset in these times. If you look back through history, that's what you had in leading up to World War I and World War II, because it wasn't solved in World War I. You had and where we are today, today in the cycle. I hate to say it, but that's where we are today in the cycle, and we've never had the type of weapons we've have today on the face of a change in currency to a new person who's kind of setting the rules. On the winner of the war sets the rules on the currency. Mm-hmm. And so we've never had this. And if you just really think through that and think, okay, well, who sets the rules of the currency? You can either wait for everybody else to do this, as governments will try to do that, using you to be able to divide other people against you to do that, or you can just do it yourself. And you can make a change today, and you can buy Bitcoin. You can start to understand what it means, and you can actually defund the existing system while you're doing it. So when I think about where Bitcoin is today, it's a 120 million person country that can peer-to-peer trade with each other, and it's growing. It's growing exponentially. So maybe in 2 years, it's a 1 billion person country. And the more and more, so I think of it like a bridge to the other side. And that bridge is getting stronger and stronger as more people are just opting out of the existing system and walking across the bridge.
Did I hear you correctly? Your estimate of the number of Bitcoin users today is 129 million. Is that the number you said?
120 million. Yeah. And that might be a high estimate because that's holders, wallet holders. And I don't know how many people are actually using Bitcoin in that. But that would be the number of people kind of on Bitcoin today.
That's it. And then you also threw out within 2 years of billion. I mean, that may have been just as an example, but do you think the rate of exponential growth is going to be that quick?
I do. That's where I'm investing. So the Ego Death Capital, the venture capital company I founded, is investing in this space, and we have a couple of investments already under contract. They haven't closed yet, but closing. And we're specifically targeting companies that are building layer 2 and layer 3 solutions to be able to drive that adoption. Most people in this I completely remember this talking to my parents in '95 when I was talking about TCP/IP and their eyes rolling over. And we don't experience the internet through TCP/IP, or we don't experience our phones or this conversation. We don't think about TCP/IP. It moves into the background. It's a protocol layer technology. We think about it in the products that we use on top of it, on top of that open decentralized protocol layer that give our lives value. And Bitcoin is very similar. So right now, sorry. And so right now, what people trying to explain Bitcoin is like trying to explain TCP/IP in the early 90s, and people have a hard time understanding what that means. But pretty soon, and they're going to be experiencing tons of value on top of the network that just drives that adoption at a totally different rate.
Yeah. So I know we're going to wind up here in a few minutes, and we've gone from we're going to go from a conversation about helping the world, helping humanity, what's the best way forward, and now we're going to get a little bit selfish, and we go, okay, how do we acquire as much Bitcoin as possible? What are your short-term predictions in terms of the macro cycle, the current situation, and the price of Bitcoin For someone who already has a fair amount of Bitcoin, my advice to people, if you don't have any Bitcoin, get some Bitcoin immediately, is always that. But for those people who have good exposure to Bitcoin and they're just trying to maximize their portfolios, acquire as much over time as possible, do you think we've seen the lows yet? Are the lows still to come? What's the best way to take advantage of this current macro situation?
I'm not a trader, and so I very rarely talk about price. I am buying right now, and there's potential it could fall more. At these price levels, some of the miners are not profitable, and they're going to have to sell mining, sell their Bitcoin into the market. We have Mt. Gox's return of funds that is going to put some sell pressure on Bitcoin. And we have a macro environment that, just the leverage against Bitcoin that has mostly been unwound. In the overall system, it must be about a million times more leverage, and the entire system's based on leverage. So imagine what would happen today. I think as of today, there's been $51 billion of tightening after $5 trillion of easing. And you've seen what's happened to the markets. Imagine if there's another $100 billion of tightening or more. Imagine if they tried to unwind that balance sheet of $5.5 trillion, and they tried, every single thing would collapse, and it would be escalating, and that collapse would also take Bitcoin down more as well. So that's actually why, and that's why you have to be careful on the timing of this, because people are measuring Bitcoin through all of this chaos. And they're unable to see what's happening with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is, so if that continued to happen, then Bitcoin would be the only thing of any value left, because every bank would fail. And so you can imagine that's not going to continue to happen. The US is going to be forced into yield curve control. They're going to be forced into printing. The amount that is stimulus that is coming is, I can't tell you when, but the amount of stimulus that's coming is going to be ungodly. And either Bitcoin being credit protection from the collapse, or inflation protection against what's coming. It'll work as both in both of those results. So end of the day, it could fall a little bit more, but it could if somebody you could also have a major government start buying it, or major companies start buying it for the same reasons we're talking about, and any one of them starts to change the dynamics completely. Here's the best way I think it looks. It's and this is from Knut Svanham. 21 million, divide everything by 21 million. That's what eventually Bitcoin's going to be worth. So this, where you're buying right now, is a rounding error on that, if that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. Well, Jeff, this is the first time we've chatted. I've had an absolute ball. So thank you so much for taking the time. Greatly appreciate it. How can people get in contact with you?
Best is just Jeff Booth on Twitter.
Okay. Follow you on Twitter. That's the tip. Jeff Booth at Twitter. Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Hopefully we get a chance to chat again. And yeah, guys, let me know in the comments below. Did you love hearing from Jeff? I'm hoping to get more guests like this on the show in the future. So let me know if you want me to continue to do that. Smash up the like, and hopefully if Jeff sees a whole bunch of likes there, I might be able to twist his arm and get him to come back on the show. That would be awesome. So go ahead and do that now. And guys, take care. Like, subscribe, do all the good things, and I'll see you later. Thanks a lot.